New section. This is your one now.
It is. Thanks. This is a different amendment, but it's part of the same package of tax proposals. So we've kind of largely had the outlines of the discussion, but I do think it is worth pointing out, and it kind of relates to something Jed Nash there raised about, you know, the value of wealth and what it is and who has it and so on. The Central Bank quarterly report for the end of 2021 shows that net.
I just want to remind you that we've discussed it already. So.
No, we haven't discussed. We haven't discussed 3.
Oh no, we haven't.
Sorry,
no,
4.
We haven't
discussed 4.
We have discussed 4.
We've discussed 3 and 8.
3. Sorry, my
2 and 8.
Yes, yeah,
2 and 8 and 3 was out of order.
I agree.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just to be helpful, sorry, Chair. So this is a proposal specifically for a wealth tax on the top 5% of households, 2% tax on their accumulated wealth, but stripping out €1 million for the family home, if you like, right? So, because we don't believe in taxing the family home, we don't think it's the same as wealth that is additional to that, i.e. multiple properties, large land holdings, large holdings of shares, large amounts of cash in the bank, or whatever. We think those are 2 quite different types of wealth, particularly in a country where 70% of people own their own home. So that is, I suspect, a difference we have with the Labour Party in terms of how we approach these things, but we absolutely stand over it and don't believe people should be punished, if you like, for managing to own a family home, particularly where the state has failed so badly in the provision of social housing, and where it's fear of homelessness or paying extortionate rents that often drive people towards trying to purchase their own home, and they work hard and they struggle hard in order to achieve that, and then get landed with, in our opinion, regressive further taxes on something they've already paid for. They've paid a lot of tax on the income that was used to pay for, and so on. So that is our view. So it's in that mind that our particular proposal for wealth tax comes about, and against the background, as I mentioned earlier on, that at the end of quarter 2021, net household wealth, that's after debts, liabilities and so on, is €883 billion, an increase of 89 billion in just 1 year. Extraordinary increase over the year 2021, which is the year of the pandemic. That includes, and this speaks to Deputy Nash's point, that includes 400 billion of financial assets. 400 billion. So that is a lot of financial assets. And when you consider that I haven't got the exact figures in front of me, but roughly, the bottom 50% have only 1.4% of all the wealth. 1.4. Whereas the top 10% have 53% of the wealth. So it's self-evident that when you're talking about that amount of wealth, 53%, that's 440 billion, and that's in the hands of about 140,000 people. Right? And our proposal proposes to strip out, to give them, even, it's just so we're not accused of taxing the family home, to strip out €1 million for that 140,000 people. And you were still left with hundreds of billions of euros concentrated in the hands of that group of people. And we're proposing a very modest 2% on the value of those wealth and assets. Quite frankly, they wouldn't feel it, but it would generate a lot of revenue. And wealth taxes are commonplace in many other jurisdictions. They were more commonplace 20 or 30 years ago. I think it is a regressive move that countries have moved away from wealth taxes, but some countries still have them, and some have actually introduced them during the context of COVID as a sort of solidarity effort to try and redistribute some of the wealth and income. So I think it is a reasonable thing to do. Ours goes slightly further than other proposals for wealth tax. There are groups like, I think, TASC and NARI have proposed over the years, but why we wouldn't at least discuss the possibility of a wealth tax when it is done elsewhere, and, discuss the fairness of it and have a national debate about that inequality in the distribution of wealth, and to what extent it could contribute a lot more money to the revenue that we need for the public services we all agree we need. I don't see why we wouldn't start to have that debate, and I don't apologise for pressing to have that debate every single year, because eventually we will have that debate, in my opinion.
I have no issue with a debate occurring in relation to this. I disagree on the need for a wealth tax. The reason I disagree with it is, number one, we already have a set of wealth taxes in our country: capital acquisitions tax, capital gains tax, dirt, and you could argue that the local property tax is also a form of a wealth tax. So we already have 4 taxes within our country that perform many of the functions that tend to be associated with the operation of wealth taxes. And in fact, our the CGT and the CAT taxes are set at a rate of 33%, which in many of the different analyses that have been done in comparing those taxes to their equivalent taxes in peer countries would say that Ireland has amongst the highest capital taxes versus other countries that are similar to Ireland. The reason why I don't believe there is a need for a further tax here on wealth in Ireland is because we have 4 different taxes that in their differing ways perform that role. And for those who would still advocate the case for tax beyond that, it begs the question regarding how it would be implemented. My understanding is that the other European country that recently did look at the role of a wealth tax was France, and France disbanded the use of that tax because of all of the difficulties they had in its implementation. And I can't help be struck by the contradiction that those who make the case for a wealth tax also oppose the existence of a local property tax, call for its abolition. That mean those who live in mansions would gain the most from the implementation of their policies. It is the most regressive tax cut that is advocated for by anybody in the Oireachtas. And to argue on one hand that we need a further wealth tax while arguing also for the abolition of the LPT, I think is inconsistency at best. And we already have, as I said, Cathaoirleach, in addition to the LPT, CGT, CAT and DIRT, all of which in effect play a role in taxing what approximates wealth at a rate that is very high of 33%. So that being said, of course, I utterly respect the fact that other colleagues in this committee take a very different view to me on that matter. Respect that, respect why they're making the case for it. But Cathaoirleach, I don't believe the place in which we should indicate the role of that debate is inside the finance bill. And for that reason, I can't accept this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Right, we'll once more, and we will put the question then.
Yeah. Well, look, we've had the discussion and we differ, but I do want to say that it is simply not accurate to say that what we're proposing is regressive. It's just not accurate, and we're very, very clear in what our proposal here is. That this wealth tax will target the wealthiest 5%, who have, according to, and one of the things, by the way, I should say, we don't do year-on-year studies of this distribution, but insofar as they were done by groups like Task and at one point the CSO, but they don't seem to do it on a regular basis, which they should, in my opinion, in terms of this distribution. They both came up with figures of around the top 10% having 53% of the wealth, the top 10% having, the top 10% having 53% of the wealth, top 5% having about 37% of the wealth. And we are proposing to design a wealth tax, or at least have a requirement arising out of this bill that the government would actually look into a serious study about how you could design a tax which would be directed at that group of people, excluding the family home. Now, is it impractical to do it, as the Minister suggests? Is it very difficult? Well, we could answer those questions if we actually seriously looked at the matter. But we don't want to look at the matter. But what I do know is the central bank can manage to produce figures on it. Right? So somebody has some information about where the wealth is. Somebody has that, because they produce them every single quarter in the central bank quarterly report. They are able to tell us about how much household wealth there is, how much liabilities there are, and then we also, at various times, but not consistently enough in my opinion, have had the CSO and groups like Task do actual studies of the distribution of that. And by the way, their findings are largely in line with other global studies of that in the Western world, largely. Right? There's a bit of difference here and there in the Western world, but largely that inequality in the distribution of wealth is fairly consistent around the Western world. And you know, as the Minister knows very well, Piketty has studied it, right? And he's read the book, and he knows it's a very definite pattern of concentration of wealth that has accelerated over the last 20 or 30 years, right? And we think we should seriously look at it and study it. And then, you know, we can answer the question, would it be too difficult to do it? I don't believe that. I think there's always an argument, oh, it's too difficult to tax the rich, but it's really easy to tax the workers. And that's what we do. So I think that's unfair, and I think we should at least try and get the facts on it, so that we could have an informed debate. But it's simply inaccurate. I just want to say to the Minister, it is inaccurate for him to say that what we're proposing is regressive. And by the way, you know, what the local property tax rate is, what, Minister, just a bit over 500 million a year. So what we're proposing is to raise a hell of a lot more than that, multiples of that, from the people at the top. So whereas they might benefit a small amount, what's the highest amount any multi-millionaire in a mansion that you're kind of is paying in property tax? What's the highest amount they're paying? 1,000 a year, right? So yeah, they benefit from that, but in our proposals, they will pay a hell of a lot more on the other side with a wealth tax. Still very affordable from their point of view, and they would also, as we'll discuss in an amendment that's coming up in a minute, they would also pay an additional property tax on properties beyond the principal private residency. So just for factual accuracy, we're not proposing something regressive.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. We frequently hear the need for those who have more to pay more advocated around the basis of the 1% principle. And I think it's important to be clear that we live in a country in which the top 1% of taxpayers pay just under a quarter of all of the income tax and USC. That is a progressive tax code in operation. That is a tax code where the more income you have, the more tax you pay. And the point that was made there by Deputy Boyd Barrett there, where he referenced the report of the central bank, it's one thing to produce the figures. It's an entirely different matter to look at how a tax on it can be effectively implemented. But even with that point in mind, let's look at what the constituents of that wealth could be that are captured in the report that Deputy Boyd Barrett referred to. If that wealth is captured in the value of a home, it pays local property tax. If it's captured in the value of savings, if that savings earns interest, it pays dirt tax. If it is captured in a financial instrument of some kind, when that financial instrument is sold or the subject of a transaction, it pays tax at that point. If it's wealth that's inherited from one generation to another, it pays a tax at that point as well. So one of the reasons why I oppose the policy that has been put forward is, as I said in my opening statement, that we have in effect taxes in place already that perform some of the roles of the tax that Deputy O'Farrell and Deputy Boyd Barrett are making the case for. And if there is a need for a report and further analysis into the matter, I'm sure that there's something the Parliamentary Budget Office could look at on behalf of this committee. I know this committee has resources that it needs and that it makes good use of. I'm sure the committee could look at doing a report in this area. But particularly after Ireland has just made a decision to enter into an OECD agreement that commits us to a minimum effective tax rate, I'm not going to include signals in our finance bill that indicate that we have very big changes coming on the taxation of either people, their income, which I believe would undermine the competitiveness of our country and undermine our ability to attract and keep wealth and jobs in Ireland. Thank you, Ciarán.
Minister.
Yeah, we've had the discussion, and the Minister is essentially saying, yeah, we'll scare the horses, scare the horses of investment, or maybe he's suggesting the wealthy will go flying out of the country if we tax them a bit more. But you know, that's been the old argument's been around forever, and it's a justification for never trying to address the inequality in wealth and income. And I think it is worth actually saying that the government were put under pressure to raise the corporate tax rate to 15%, and they've now done it, and the world hasn't fallen apart. And the spokespeople for some of the big multinationals that the Minister is so worried might be frightened by all this have often said that the tax regime here isn't the major reason they're here. I think we should actually listen to that. They're here because they want to be part of the European market. They're here because they have an educated workforce. They're here because of a certain level of political stability, and so on. So the idea that they're going to run away from the amount of profits they're making in this country at the moment is, you know, short of us doing something very radical, I just don't agree. But anyway, sure.
Are you pressing the amendment?
Yeah, yeah.
You're pressing the amendment. Yeah. So on amendment number 4, then the question is that this new section be there inserted. Those in favour say tá.
Oh.
Those against say níl.
Neil.
I think the question is lost.